Hello, hello! In this video, I'm going to show you how I made the bodice and jacket for my Steampunk Red Queen costume. I started by making a cover for my corset out of some crushed red silk, and since this is not a corset itself, it's just decorative, I didn't put any boning in it. I made a front panel out of some scrap fabric and attached it using Velcro and two different types of elastic. At this point, I just have kind of a vague idea as to how I want to embellish the front of the corset cover, so I am just playing around with some charms that are actually broken up pieces of several heart bracelets that I found. Even though I have Velcro on the front panel, I wanted to make sure that the panel didn't pop off every time I moved, and so I sewed some elastic onto 3 points on each side of the front panel, and I'm using hooks and eyes to attach them to the sides of the corset cover. Now, I could have used really small hooks and eyes and hidden them, but I found these really large wiry ones, and I felt that by actually showing them, it gives the overall piece a little bit more of an industrial kind of steampunk look. So I purposely sewed them on the outside where they can be seen. I realized that everything was looking just a little bit too red on red on red, and so I raided my scrap fabric stash and found some leftover black trim and was able to salvage enough of it to make these 2 little decorative side pieces. I also found some jewels that I think were left over from another project as well, and used those to embellish it even further. Okay, so this is the part where I could have made things very easy on myself and just cut my back jacket panels out of solid fabric. But me being me, I came up with this last-minute spark of inspiration that I felt would really take things to the next level, and of course it meant adding hours onto the entire process. Instead of one solid panel, I would cut my fabric into strips, and then I would sew those strips into a chevron pattern, turning each side on the diagonal, making the entire back of the jacket look like a gigantic heart made out of chevrons. If that does not make sense, just stay tuned. It will make sense in a minute. So after cutting each strip for each side of my back panel, I had to make sure that, first of all, everything was lined up on the same diagonal. And I made it a pretty severe diagonal, so I had to line up these strips perfectly. If I didn't sew them together correctly, I would either end up with a piece of fabric that my pattern piece no longer fits on, or I might run the risk of the 2 pieces not lining up with each other, which would ruin a lot of fabric. And this stuff, it wasn't super cheap, so I had to be very, very careful. And I remember at this point being really, really, really tired, and so it took a long time to make sure that this turned out okay. But in the end, I am so, so glad that I did it. Here's one completed side. You'll notice that it looks kind of irregular, but the reason why it's sewn so strangely is because that's how I needed to make my pattern piece fit. Now here, I didn't exactly line them up properly. They look a little bit too straight. They're not on the diagonal. So I had a minor freak out, but then I realized I just needed to repin everything. Luckily, I wasn't too tired to remember that I didn't include seam allowances in my pattern, and so I just had to draw them on and cut ever so slightly outside of it. Now all I have to do is sew the center together and open it up, and you will see the full chevron pattern. I cut the rest of the jacket pattern pieces out of solid fabric because I felt that that detail in the back was more than enough, and moved on to the sleeve. Now, the sleeve suddenly looked too plain, so I had to make my life even more difficult by also cutting the sleeve into a similar chevron pattern. Now, I'm not sure exactly what this fabric was made of. It was like a faux kind of alligator look, but I was afraid to iron it because it looked like the sort of thing that would melt. So for every seam, I had to also sew the seam open. Of course, I then had to do the same thing on the upper part of my sleeve, cutting it into tiny little strips, sewing it back together, and then sewing each seam open really meticulously, adding even more hours worth of work. But in the end, I think you'll agree it was super worth it because look at how pretty that turned out. And I'm actually really happy with my sewing machine because it can be quite temperamental and does weird things on strange textured fabrics, but the stitches turned out really, really nice. So thank you, sewing machine, for holding up. But now all I have to do is attach it like you would any other sleeve. I ended up doing a lot of this by hand because I didn't think my sewing machine would enjoy the bulk, and I didn't want to take any chances. Using a couple more of the bracelets that I got from Claire's, I had to go to I think 3 different locations to get enough. I made a really ornate jeweled cuff for just one of my sleeves. You'll notice the asymmetry thing that pops up in a lot of my designs definitely pops up in this one as well. And even though I hot glued everything down, me being me, I had to go in and hand stitch the edge because I don't trust hot glue by itself. I just don't. So at this point I had to stop filming and make up for the time that I spent on the back and sleeve detail. You'll notice that I've added almost like a military cord kind of design to the puffed sleeve on one side and these big beautiful roses. As the Red Queen, I wanted to have that balance of kind of sternness and also like regality, you know, that sort of flair. I'm adding more of my bracelet charms as well as some red rose beads that I collect all year round. And of course with me, everywhere there's a rose, there has to be some thorns. And now I'm only going to tease the rest of the jacket design. If you want to see how everything turned out, you'll have to stay tuned for the next video. I'll show you how I made that layered bustle skirt, as well as all of my accessories and finishing touches. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.